give it a moment there, and hopefully everyone's having good success today with internet and all of the things that make all this work together. A little bit about myself. I'm a instructor at South Central College in North Mankato, Minnesota, and I'm the assistant fire chief for the city of North Mankato, and for 15 years I have been working with firefighter safety and training. So whether it is fire related, incident related, and in lots of those different arenas. And kind of what brings this here today as far as an awareness, our basis will be on the harness system, a little bit of a discussion about that, but it is also about agricultural safety on the farm. And I work with a couple of different groups. One of those is UMASH, Upper Midwest Agricultural Safety and Health, and with a focus on everything from worker health to worker safety, kind of the in between, as far as trying to get that education out there. And what I look at this as, when we start talking the difference between training firefighters and training rescue people for safety, is that looking at working the prevention side, so that if we can get what we call this as an instructor is a change in behavior to on the farm, adjusting to a couple of little differences and making our environment a whole lot safer. And looking at some of the other arenas that we have, one of the other programs is also the RF- program, which is Rural Firefighters Delivering Agricultural Safety and Health. And what that is, that's a free curriculum available to your fire departments, and which I'm one of the trainers for that. We would come out and work with your fire department, just like every October, most people are used to, hey, we're gonna do fire safety, and we're gonna do stop, drop, and roll, and we're gonna, everything from fire, detections and all detectors and everything else. This is ag-related safety. And what I'd kind of put together today, had planned on, we were going to be together with a conference. We were going to do some demos and get some ropes and get some activities and things out for folks. And in a virtual world, I did put together, I've got a video. We did a little bit of a training. It's got uses the harness system. When we get done, I've also got information about, we'll do some questions and things when we get done. I've also got some information on the grant that you can sign up for, $400 per unit for safety equipment. So Laura, if you want to test the waters.
Hello, my name is Jim Zwaska, and I'm a safety trainer with South Central College in Mankato, Minnesota. And I'm here today to talk about bin safety. After the incident has started, knowing that you are in trouble once you are up to your knees and you've just passed the point of self-rescue. And today, when we're talking about actually going into the bin, part of that prior planning with the lockout, tagout, incorporating into telling employees, telling family, telling students, children, whoever is around, that this action is going to be happening. And with that, that you've made a prior plan together as a group, so that if something were to happen, what next steps do you have to have happen? With that being, where are the numbers for your local emergency rescue? Where is the numbers? Making sure that everyone who is on site has a clear explanation of where this location is. If you had to explain that, make sure that any of the entities involved, can you explain where we are today to get personnel out here? Very important to rescue personnel to have that location, because it expedites our actions. Okay. And One of the first things to make sure that the equipment is de-energized would be to make sure that it is shut off and lockout tag out using signage and actual mechanical lock to make sure that someone does not energize it while you're doing your work inside of the bin. Looking at de-energizing systems, that we've got our master, which is normally at the top, should be our main to de-energize. The cabinet would get shut, and identification that this is happening, and lock up or control the access to the box after it has been shut down. Okay, and part of the entry, after we have determined that yes, it is an issue that we need to enter the bin to do, is that to make sure that we have the proper equipment. And with the proper equipment, making sure that we have a harness, and with that we'll go through a little explanation about what the harness types and what is needed for this type of an operation. Here's some examples of lanyards and different types of grabs and self-retracting devices depending on what height you are working at. When we're looking for PPE and making sure that we have all of our equipment in place, obviously is following the directions, following the advisement of the manufacturer, making sure that you inspect it regularly. With that, when you're looking at this harness, a basic fall restraint harness, the hitching point will be behind your head, which actually serves two purposes. First of all, it keeps it out of your mobility area, and with that, if it does come to a rescue, that if you have to be tensioned from this harness, that the rest of your body will follow, so that you will stay upright. And when you're pulling, that it pulls from the correct places on your body so that you do not end up with arm injuries, spinal injuries, any other injuries to yourself. With that, the harness should cut across the center of your chest and should go across the insides of your legs. And I will now put it on. The attaching point, as you can see, is at my back. I will run both leg the inside of my legs, and making sure that I'm using all of the okay. Once you get it on, make sure that it fits correctly and that you will not come out of it, that everything is hooked. Take up our slack in the legs to make sure that we do not have excess material hanging off. And the harness has a purpose, as I explained. And part of the reason for not using just a standard rope and tying it onto yourself, depending on what you're using for knots, is that if you make a knot and put it over something, hang on to it, you can let go. Otherwise, if it's pulling from a single point, that you would add to the injury. And warning against tying it around yourself, that if you tie it around yourself and tie off and it has to be pulled on, is that the possibility that you would be pushing on your chest, on your stomach, hard on your spine, and lots of other possible areas for injury. Okay, now that we've got our harness in place, we have our attaching point on the back, and for the demonstration purposes here, I actually have a short tether on here. If I'm going to the top of a bin, the top of a lag, top of a roof, and I need security to keep from falling. If I needed to be in place inside of the bin, I'm just a very simple attaching point. The other items that can be used is also webbing, and this is just a 1-inch tubular webbing. It has a very high breaking strength to it. Make sure that when you're climbing that you maintain 3 points of contact. Yep. Okay, if we're looking inside the bin, you can see that this bin has a ladder in it. You can see the angle inside and where the opening is, a little bit of material, and equipment. The next picture is of a anchoring system that anchors through the side of the bin and has a closed loop on it to make sure that it does not open, and has an anchor plate on the outside of the bin. And we'll do this for the sake of clarity. What we will go through is attaching a assembly inside of the bin so that I've got a high point that is attached to my harness, and I will, if I would fall down, my attendant at the opening would be able to hold me in place. And if you look up here, I have a knot passing pulley, which is just a very large pulley that has a opening in it large enough to pass a carabiner and a rope with a knot through. As this equipment would stay inside of the bin, in the bin would be very basic rope that would be something the equivalent of a clothesline rope, because this is not going to be used for life safety. There will not be anyone on the end of this. The rope that is going to be attached to myself will be hooked into this, and all this is going to be used for is to pull this through so that I have life safety rope to myself. This would be in the center of the bin. Off to the side of the bin would be my attaching point by the opening, and that's where my attendant would be. Inside the bin, I would pull my life safety rope through and pull it back to the opening and detach my life safety or my cord and attach this to myself. Okay, now that I am connected to the life safety line that runs up to the center of the bin and back to the opening, at the opening I will have a grab device or a prusik cord attached so that as I work inside of the bin, the slack can be taken up as I pull through there, and if I would falter or if I would slide down inside the bin, the grab device would grab on. As the attendant is at the opening and I'm moving around, they can allow me to move around by simply putting their hand on here, and the rope will slide. and if something were to happen, that it would lock onto the piece of rope. Okay, when we're looking at the side diagram of the bin and a little explanation about the pulley and the harness and some of the structure of the bin. If material has been taken out of the bin and I have material that is in a V down to the bottom, maybe it has clumps or something in there, we want to make sure that we never get under what we call the angle of repose. Once we get below the angle of repose, our best chance of being engulfed is once we get below here. When we're looking at putting the system in there to work from a distance, is that we're going to have our attendant at the opening. There will be an anchor that will go through the side of the bin, making sure that it is an anchor worthy of what we are doing. The other pulley will be attached up on the top, the passing pulley. The rope will come in and come down to the attendant. It allows you freedom of movement from side to side, and also if something were to happen, if we had just simply attached here, that if you were attached, you would continue to follow down to the grain surface and have a less chance of surviving because of being covered from the side. So ideally in the center, it gives us movement, plus this person that's working at the opening is taking up the slack as we go. If something were to happen, the information that this person, if self-rescue could not be accomplished, that this person goes and gets help and does not try and get into the bin to help you. We'll also mention some of the other farm engulfment hazards that are there. Small bins, dryer setups, holding bins, wet corn holding bins, great places for kids to play, and having different switches involved that come on and off depending on what levels are. Another hazard on the farm, elevators and high-line electrical wires. Anytime that you're moving them around, making sure that you're looking up.
Hold everything in place. Okay, so now that thing is tied off and it's not going to move. Our weight is all still being carried by the load release strap, right?
Okay, we'll kind of wrap up some of the things that we talked about today. Obviously, planning is a big part of it. Making sure that family, friends, anyone who is going to be around, whether it's an employee or a person, knows that we're going to be making entry into the bin, knows what the emergency responses are, knows the location of the bin site so that that can get out to the rescuers or first responders. Training with that, taking a moment and going through what you're going to do before you go into the bin, meaning that, have you practiced with the rope? Have you practiced with the entrant? Have you tried all of the openings? Have you tested a lot of your procedures? The equipment all needs to be life safety quality. If you are not working with quality equipment, remember that nothing should happen unless you have training in it. Training with the knots, training with the harness, training with the PPE, and any of those types of equipment. Lockout, tagout is a good practice anywhere on the farm, whether it is a tractor, whether it is a grain bin, whether it is a dryer, all those pieces of equipment, making sure that it is de-energized, and if someone is working on it, that it cannot get energized. The practice, putting it out there, making sure that our planning actually will work. Having the discussions, making sure the shutoff is the correct shutoff, making sure that the tag out, everyone is aware of that. So we practice that. And when we do things, it's a lot easier to find an observer in a moment's notice than to try and find a rescuer in a moment's notice. And with that, Jim Zwaska with South Central College. from myself and other responders, I'd like to thank you for taking your time today to make your farm safer.
Okay. Uh, as usual, yep, little video glitches and things in there depending on where you're at. Hopefully, if you were looking, kind of following along with that, what the gist of that, and we'll open this up for questions here in a moment, but looking at having entry made into a bin after we have de-energized, shut down, lockout, tag out, and making that entry with a harness, with a high point. And that's some of the things that come with the training or a little bit of the education with this, that you do the practice ahead of time, figuring out that if you're using a harness and the harness for that reason, because it does hang your head and cue together as far as if a rescue has to be made. The other part of that that is very important is having that observer. Now, whether, and part of the incidents, looking at, and I know everyone's probably had friends, relatives, I've had from students that we've lost to grain incidents, customers back when I worked with the machinery industry, a very common incident in neighborhoods, and it does. To take it all the way back to what the congressman was talking about ahead of that, most farms cannot financially withstand an incident that, depending on what level of injury happens with that. And hopefully, yes, that it is a successful from that. Some of these other groups, remembering that we're trying to get on the pre-planning side of it. Some of the other things of availability, that this safety equipment is available. You can do a grant for it. Otherwise, we'd really kind of looked at it, and if you're going to set up a farm for fall protection, for protection this way, that kind of looking toward, kind of making it as cool as the Harley Davidson t-shirt, I guess I would say. Something that, or the Pioneer t-shirt or sweatshirt, that safety equipment would become second nature within that environment. And we've got a question out there. Most dangerous part of getting in the grain bin? I just thought it was inhaling the suffocating. And looking at the two different categories of which we put ag injuries into. Now, when we look at the CDC information, that from the injuries, we're looking at that we actually injure about 100 agricultural workers a day that lose time within the industry. We look at the amount of deaths, 2017, 416 deaths, and we kind of divide that into the dangers of whether they're actually caught in the machinery within the bin, or whether it is actually an avalanche or being engulfment hazard. And between the two of those, the harness taking a look at the engulfment hazard, but yet following those rules ahead of time. As far once they're engulfed, they're actually ingesting, they would have to be engulfed below the grain surface. Excuse me, as far as the machinery, considering that caught in bin sweeps and other augers and machinery that is in there, trying to, preemptively lock out, tag out. If you take it from the industry side, lockout, tag out takes care of the machinery that is running in there. And I realize that's not always as convenient, but yet There's a lot of choices that are made on the farm at a moment's notice that have long-standing repercussions. Question on here about the harness and being able to obtain these types of things. And if you're looking at that, one of the resources available for would also be having with your local rescue, or, and with some of that, finding out, as I kind of stated in the video, was that finding who is your responder? If you have an incident, where do your responders come from? Are they trained and what do they have? And that would also segue into that conversation. You know, the harnesses are available. We had actually had put together a list of Minnesota companies, places where you can get a harness, and you have your Fastenals, your Grangers, and all the way down to, you know, like a Home Depot. You're looking for that, a harness, something that you pull underneath your legs. You're not specifically not looking for a rescue harness. You're looking for more of a fall restraint harness, you know, as far as category. And you know, your life safety at the lowest bidder. I realized that you could purchase one for about $45 to $50. Generally, I was looking at the ones, you know, that we generally buy for fire departments, confined space rescue, and that, and from the $200 mark in there. And I guess that kind of answers that.